Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 3, Episode 8. Ron Malanga joins us for a discussion of the Music Aptitude Profile Sensitivity Measure, Subtest 2, Balance.
Big Bad Beau.
There we go. Hey. That's got to be our new theme song.
So I'm at a loss as to, I'll let you guys lead where you want to go with this. But even though, Eric, I think this all emerged from me, begging you while
you made me open.
I'm driving to Orlando and I'm begging you to take an aptitude test.
Oh, you wanted Eric to take it?
We were talking, it was still factory sealed.
Oh, really?
Factory sealed Music Aptitude Profile CD sitting right here.
Nice.
And I opened it. And Ron said, he asked me how I did on the balance. And I said, I don't remember if I ever took it.
Mm-hmm.
He says, you're kidding me. So what did we spend? 2 hours on the phone that day?
Yeah, we were on the phone for about 2.5 hours.
This is right after I spent 2 hours on Zoom with Beau.
Yeah, the drive to my brother's from door to door from my mother's place, if the traffic's behaving, is about 3.5 hours. And I think you and I were on for 2 hours and 47 minutes of that. Yeah.
2 hours and 47. I didn't.
Nice.
So I opened up my map CD and we took test number 2 in the sensitivity package.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Called.
Okay, well, let's record all this because
it's being recorded.
Okay, well, we could just whenever you want, we can formally start.
Yeah, I think we just did.
Yeah, and Beau, I told Eric
the trumpet sounded it.
The trumpet shall sound.
Okay, so let's back up for a sec. So tell me the story. Ron wanted to take a sensitivity test.
Ron, you called me.
Yeah, I did, and you were just chatting about all sorts of things, and somehow, amongst the many things we were chatting about, the conversation turned towards those tests, and I remember saying that I was appealing, I think, to an intuition that I had about perhaps persons who speak the way I do, ramble, that feel like everything is essential, would be unsurprisingly naturally ungifted, have a low aptitude in what balance measures. And I found that amongst my highest scoring students, they all are quite laconic and precise. They speak like sculptors, like they've already imagined what isn't essential, and they just carve away. And I talk like a painter. I'm always adding, adding. And I think, of course, anecdotes aren't data, and so I'm always curious when people that speak like I do, and you kind of do, Eric. I want to take the balance test to find out if there's something elemental about the way language and the music work at the level of just staying on topic, finding gist, and then elaborating on it, which I think is somehow elemental to being a very facile improviser. But right or wrong, that was what sort of drove the conversation, and you did it.
So, Eric, have you taken a balance test before?
No, not that I remember. I do remember hearing the beginning of it, though. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I took it because I recalled the directions. And I could recall the music items in the directions.
Interesting.
I almost sang the dang thing.
That's right, you did. That's right. I remember that. I mean, you did tell me that you either led or were part of administering it to college students at one point. So maybe you kind of heard it and then you.
But we didn't give the sensitivity measures to them. We
Oh, okay.
gave
Okay.
we gave what was it, meter and
Yeah, it's usually meter and melody when people
yeah,
really parse it down to its bare bones.
That's what Temple had me administer to incoming freshmen. Why is MAP not used for? That's a whole other question. But
I think it's yes. It's hard to wrap your head around the various ways these different factors of aptitude interact with the holistic experience of playing an instrument or singing or improvising, and what aspect of that at anywhere along the display of growing skills is quote unquote natural learning that didn't need to be differentiated according to aptitude. I think there's so many factors going on that I think the complexity of it, until it's somehow made more clear about the different modularities in the brain and those kinds of things, I think it'll be oft ignored. I imagine somebody digging it out 100 years from now, when we have reversed engineered the mind and we've got AI that we can then understand the mind of Mozart or something, the mind of Monk. I imagine somebody digging it back out and going, "Wow,
Mozart, Monk, and Mingus." That's
Mingus. Oh, Mingus. Wow, yeah.
Yeah, I'm picturing I'm picturing some kind of measurement device or almost like a baseball card for musicians where you can see their stats in different areas, and I'm assuming we would see certain trends, like musicians that are in the like 70 or 80th percentile for all the aptitudes versus someone who is the same, but one of them is basically maxed out. Like, what would the actual difference in musical achievement and musical just proclivity to be skilled at certain things? And I'm certain that's what you're thinking of too, or the other way around. Someone's above average in everything, but one thing is at zero, basically. One thing is just as low as it can go.
That's Ron.
If there's anything that I've learned that I feel like I can really deeply trust, that isn't the sort of thing that I anecdotes aren't data, but I'm sniffing out things and I'd love to explore them more. I have at least had students who fit what you just described. If you're out there, they called her supermodel. Now her name's going to escape me.
You mentioned her before.
Yeah, she scored. She crushed the melody. She crushed harmony. She crushed tempo. We're talking 40 out of 40, 40 out of 40, 40 out of 40. Then she got within, it was the 6th percentile, whatever that would be for her age at that time, on meter, and then crushed phrasing, balance, and style. And she was so unmusical when I met her. And Gordon's intuition, the first thing he said was, "What does she walk like?" Which blew my mind at the time, because she had a very distinctive walk. She practically hovered. And if the meter test, if he was intuiting that his meter test measured how we structurally integrate imbalance, which then becomes our foundation for pulse, for tempo, if somebody scores incredibly low on that, they would probably walk in an imbalance avoiding manner, which is exactly what she did. She walked like she's trying to float all the time. And I had a conversation with her mother, or blew her mother's mind, that one of the first questions out of my mouth was, "Did she fall down a lot in her childhood?" And she was like, "Oh, we thought she had some kind of real disorder, and we were really worried about her." And it's like, okay, I've had a kid who I think explained to me at least a core of what meter is. I think I'm a kid who I get a sense I'm the kid who explains at least a core of what the balance subtest is, and maybe phrasing and style too, because I can't understand people missing any of those questions. So those questions are way too easy for me, and they were, at least when I took the test. Now, great, maybe I'm not the cardinal example, because again, my first taking of balance and style was 32 years old or something, so I'm still subject to however they inch up. But I listen to
Mhm.
those, and I don't understand how it's not instantaneously obvious that that tempo doesn't work for that one on style, and how it's not instantaneously obvious when the second one is worse, but the first one's better on phrasing.
Totally.
But I get that. So yeah, my playing card would look really funny, and uh, and
So
I think
just for everyone's reference, I just over the past uh, day and a half did the sensitivity test. So I did the balance, the phrasing, and the style. Um, so Ron, I don't know if I mentioned. So I took the test yesterday with Ron, balance, got I think 8 wrong. But when I took it this morning, I got 4 wrong. But what I found more interesting was that I got there were 3 that were wrong on both of them. So that
yeah,
and so that's what I found most interesting about that.
yeah.
And maybe I'll take it again in like a few weeks or a month or something. But I'm not going to listen to the test and see. But I'm wondering if there are trends if I'll keep getting those 3 wrong unless I do some kind of purposeful analysis on those. And then phrasing, I got pretty high on 27. And then I could already tell with the style one that like it was like a few questions in, I was like, I could tell that it was just going to be all over the place because I'm very open to the tempos being different. Some of them I could see, yeah.
It's so funny you say that. You're open to them. I have the same experience. I listen to them like, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, if I listen to early, the 2 different famous Glenn Gould versions of Goldberg variations, and one he's bum, bum, dee-da, dee-da. And it was the second one I ever heard of his, and the first dum, dee-da, dee-doo, dee-da, dee-da, and that was his, whichever the years were. The first time I ever heard the slower of the 2, I was just frozen by it because he's such an artist in his own way. That some people love him, some people don't. But he's an artist, and I was transfixed by that slower version. And it's one of the only ones in my artistic experience where I don't feel like I could truly decide between the 2. So you say,
Mm,
you're open to them, and I listen to Gordon's test, and I'm like, yeah, I'm open to either one of those tempos, but the other one's better,
yeah,
objectively better, is how I feel about it, about all
yeah,
those
yeah.
questions, you know. And so I would imagine, like in my like joyful world, somebody that scores misses 6 or so in their adulthood on one of these various sensitivity tests, I would want that person to not know their score and be willing to take the test again a week later, take it again a week later, completely ignorant of which ones they got right and wrong, and just see if they move more and more towards what Gordon's answer key would say are the right answers, the
Mm.
way I kind of have in my most obvious deficiency in terms of aptitude. And I have over the years without trying to know which one's right and wrong, not trying to cheat around it, like you said, just have the experience of just taking it again. And it's fascinating, the ones that end up staying with you and still being, why don't I miss that one 3 different times, man? So there's something going on in that one. And
Oh,
then,
totally. And Ron and I were talking over Zoom about this yesterday with the balance test, for example. You hear a melody and it's finished, and then you hear the same melody starts in the same way, and then it's finished in a different way, and you have to choose which one is better. That's the instruction, just which one's better. And um, my immediately, like after I finished the test and Ron and I were talking, I was thinking about Engelman and thinking about all this stuff we're always talking about with inductive learning. And what stood out to me with the balance test is there could be different reasons why one of them is better than the other one. So some of them might be the voicing of the melody gets weird. Like Ron used this example where there's a flowing melody that's staying within a certain range, and all of a sudden there's this like weird octaves or things that just don't really make sense. They're not an exciting variation. They just don't make sense. And so that's an example of one melody being tossed out because it just doesn't make melodic sense. But there could be another example. I have only listened to it 2 times now, but I remember there were examples where the phrase was just too short in one of the examples. It just gets cut off. And so the reason that one is invalid is because it's not rhythmically balanced or metrically balanced in terms of the amount of time. And so one of my one of my ideas for potential avenues to train awareness of balance, because I mean, knowing the aptitude is great, but in a sense, we need something like tonal patterns and rhythm patterns for training balance or for training phrasing or whatever. Because I'm certain you can get better at it, even though if maybe your aptitude prevents you from learning at lightning speeds. But I would imagine if we are going to train people to develop their sense of balance, we need to separate out these different problems in why some melodies don't make sense. Because, and I don't know, and Ron and I were talking about this yesterday. I don't know if Gordon actually thought about this with his test, because maybe the ones I'm getting wrong are all reflecting a certain type of pattern that I'm not picking up on when I hear the melodies. So I'm not picking up that maybe the phrase length is. I don't think I got phrase length ones wrong like very often compared to some of the other choices. So I mean, there's a lot in there, but and I think the same thing goes for phrasing. The way that the dynamics or the or the articulation is chosen for a performance. There could be different reasons why someone's not kind of getting it, getting the punchline. Ron, do you have any intuition, like what on your own, like development of balance? Like if there's any of those those theoretical subcomponents of balance that throw you off or
I wouldn't trust what I'm about to say as being have any basis in fact, because I never really wanted to reverse analyze it that way for myself. So what you're saying, I completely agree with, especially in the context of what you understand about English and induction and that kind of thing, and how we better find a way to give the child an opportunity for like that crystalline success, and then you build in the comparisons from that. So for me, my intuition is that it's more tonal in terms of melodic shape. And maybe that's only because of what I told you as we were speaking the other day, that I got whichever one of the two practice questions wrong, that does conform to what you were describing before. I'm not sure if we're allowed to sing these. And then the other one is and hits the octaves and just
that's
is
right.
abrupt.
I remember that.
And when my emotional internal judge, even though it was a practice question, so it wasn't hard for me to remember number two, the answer is this. It wasn't like it was 25 questions into the test. I knew intellectually which was the correct answer, but I wouldn't allow myself to mark it correctly if I hadn't shifted truly within myself, my sense of hearing it for myself. I wanted to experience it for myself. I figured if there's some kind of learning that can go on here, as long as I don't push it, even if I'm not sure how it's learned, it should get learned even through sheer, brute force of repetition. And I remember after it switched for me, then I could hear what was wrong, however you want to call it, or inappropriate or less artistic about the first one. I could make those distinctions. And for me, it was the octave leap and secondarily the length of the phrase at the back end.
No, that's a really good point.
I'm probably now applying that intuition, because that's only as far as I ever went with it for each of the questions I would have missed.
Exactly.
I'm probably applying that too broadly to be an accurate version of what ought to go on the subcategories of my baseball card in this area.
So, Ron, when you first took it, how many wrong did you get?
It's either 17 or 16 wrong, and I was 32 at the time.
All right, and I got 6 wrong, and Beau.
I got 8. I got 8 wrong with Ron, but I did feel quite on display. But then I got 4 wrong this morning. Like I woke up first thing in the morning, did. So I don't know what that means. But
I'm so glad you said that, Beau, because I thought about that as you were doing it. There was a point, and I don't know if this belongs on the podcast, but there was a point when, because I could see you had said something about one that was a question, and you were leaning into this test. And the second time you mentioned like "ooh" or any version of that question, I didn't know if it was the next time you had a question mark. But I literally wrote down that around number 16, you physically moved back. I mean, you were suddenly so much further away from the camera, and I thought, oh, this is now I worried that at that moment you felt on display, and now, well, then your score is skewed.
No, I think
Because
it
you
was.
can't.
So I think it was question 14. I have my test here, and it
So,
was one of the ones where I wrote a question mark down, and I could feel my rage to mastery lighting up. Like I want to pause this and re-listen to this and get to the bottom of this.
Right.
You know?
Yep.
So that's why and then when I took it this morning, I was mostly interested in like, are any of them going to be the same? The ones that I get wrong specifically. That's what I was really
Right.
interested to know.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's that.
so can I
Yeah.
back up and contextualize what MAP does, right? So
Sure.
it's valid, and right, it's a valid music aptitude measure for these 3 sensitivity measures that we're talking about today, specifically the one in the middle called balance, which like I found interesting a lot. I was like, ooh, like I got no confidence in that one. And then every time I didn't have confidence, I got the next one wrong. It was the next one that got wrong when I had no confidence.
And I just view that as exactly what Beau just said. No, you're no longer dealing with just this part of your brain that can process this information. Now you're dealing with stress hormones and all that. I view those 4 as obviously much more accurate measure.
So but that gets carried. If Beau and I were still in 12th grade high school, we could count on these results to be in particular. We don't have it normed for old musicians.
Fair enough.
Or middle-aged musicians.
Another point I wanted to make is that when I did the test on my own without someone watching me do it, I did find way more of the answers comical. So I did find myself being like, "Are you serious? Like this is," and for some of them, I had made a decision that melody 1 was going to be the wrong one, like before the second one was already played, or I could tell that melody 1. Yeah. Like I would hear melody 1 and think, wow, melody 2 is really going to have to pull its weight to overcome this. So there was faster processing. But I mean, to be fair, that also points out maybe something interesting about my ability to manage, like my ability to keep strong audiation going under stress, under stage performance.
Yeah. And no matter your training, you're going to score the same on that test if you have that aptitude. That's the other thing. No matter your training, you never had lessons. You had some kind of innate quality about, and the training is, what do you want to call it? Is like your early childhood, your brain, development, your exposure level, what is it? And that's hard to get at. If I could give this kind of test to my little ones, if there's a way that this aptitude we could measure early in life, I mean, God, how much more information could we have about, music development and what we should do to nurture it and all that, but we can't, because it really works only in kids that are 4th grade and older. So 9 years old and older, right? That's what it's normed for. That's what the research was done on. And it was really extraordinary research. This is the best. I've never seen another measure in anywhere that's researched the way this is. There's nothing that comes close. The amount of work that went into this is astronomical.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And to do those predictive validity studies, longitudinal predictive validity studies, and to do that. So what we're playing with is these anecdotal things, and no matter what training you do, Beau, to help that, it shouldn't increase your score on the measure. No matter what training you do to help that measure, it really shouldn't reflect on, you going back and being able to. There's a learning effect, like learning how to take the test. learning how to,
Yeah,
as you get older, we get better at test taking. There's certain, that's why these scores creep up. But
well, this is where this gets interesting.
You can't jump 10 percentile,
But this is where this gets interesting, because if we are measuring an aptitude of balance, and then there's also a such thing as achievement within balance, like assuming that Ron has made some progress in his achievement,
which I have.
So
yes,
yeah, and I'm convinced I have too, because I'm a better musician now than I was when I was 20 improvising, even though I can see that a lot of it was still there, I think, balance wise. But what I think we're driving at is that there is probably some innate aptitude, innate in the sense that, after 18 it's somewhat locked in. Maybe there are still incremental gains in achievement, but so I mean, this opens up two important lines for me. One is it opens up what are the things we can do to younger musicians that actually raise the tide, all the tides of balance aptitude. But then also, if we just put that aside and start talking about adult musicians, what are the things that we can do that actually drive balance achievement? And in a sense, like, I'm very interested in both of those, because I don't want to just say like, okay, let's only focus on how to get 10-year-olds, better. There's also a lot of adult musicians that are in college and university that could probably achieve a really high level of balance achievement in terms of their development if we had actual training techniques that worked.
Yep.
And the one thing that I think is really useful from Engelman here, and I mentioned this to Ron the other day, is that when you're doing inductive teaching, which is the kind of teaching that's absolutely essential for this, teaching through musical examples, whether it's tonal patterns, rhythm patterns, phrasing, balance. The one of the problems that I think could happen on a test like this is that someone might have the actual aptitude to make the discrimination, but it is possible for their attention to not be placed properly on what they should be paying attention to. So, that could be a huge confounder for certain tests like balance. Like, if when I'm listening to the balance test, no one's telling me, and I don't even know I'm doing this, but I'm actually looking for rhythmic balance between the phrases. And what that question is supposed to measure is melodic balance. It's not like I may have the aptitude to actually make the discrimination. I might just be looking in the wrong place. Like, just like someone could have the color perceptual ability to notice red. It's just when someone's like, hey, look at this, look at that, they just happen to be looking at the blue things in the examples. And so I'm not saying this invalidates the test, but I think this introduces another level of complexity where it's like, how do we know that someone was even paying attention to what, or in a better case with kids, how do we know kids aren't just like not paying attention to the questions?
But that gets ratted out in the error and understanding the foundational statistical models that he's working in, right? Because I went brain numb on a couple of items, it's like that's in our discussion afterwards, Ron and I were, it's like, that's just your aptitude showing up,
Sure.
Yeah, but I'm with Beau on the then. Okay, now can we tease out the various factors and actually do some Engelman style teaching to be useful on top of that? And I don't think the test is the greatest thing for teasing out what constitutes it. I mean, if you remember, Gordon did have suggestions about how to work with whatever aptitude you're endowed with in his little red book that was the guidebook. And I remember one of them, of course, was strictly just, learn to compose once you're skilled at melody, harmony, tempo, and the first big four, melody, harmony, tempo, meter, and you've maximized what you've got there. Now start to compose. One, of course, was just like join a group that improvises, whether it's rock, pop, or jazz kind of thing. One was, of course, listen to various examples of multiple kinds of improvisations over the same chord progression.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that always stuck out to me, because it was a linguistic one, which is kind of the core of what drove me to get Eric to do it anyways. My intuition's about that may or may not be right about the nature of, maybe we're getting at something that definitely is a driver in language and music. And it was and I'm going to get this wrong, but it was something about discovering varieties of rhythmic balance by reciting poetry aloud. And that one always stuck with me. It was something like that. And I wish I had the little red book to read it verbatim how Gordon phrased it. But it was definitely like, oh, wow. Let me go play around with that.
What you're saying is not in the manual, correct?
It would be in the little red manual. I just don't have access to the manual right now. I'm certain Gordon had his suggestions for higher scoring and lower scoring students in the manual for each of the aptitudes.
Which I think is amazing. I was explaining these aptitude tests to a couple of friends of mine this morning in a book club, and one of the guys is a really accomplished musician, and he's supposed to get back to me with the balance test this weekend. So I'm very interested. He's super up for it. When I gave him the tonal and rhythm test, he was like 92 on both. Like, and I wasn't surprised at all. Like he's a monster improviser. Super musical. But they brought up some ethical concerns around aptitude tests in terms of like, well, what are these tests actually good for? And I think there's some concern that teachers are going to use this to like basically filter out lower aptitude students and put more energy into higher aptitude students. And I tried to make a case for the fact that like, if you have a student, if you're a private music teacher or work at a, music school, especially if you work at a music school, if you see a student who's super interested in music and they haven't been given any formal instruction yet, so they can't really prove it on an instrument yet, but they're just off the charts on the aptitude thing, and they come from a lower socioeconomic background, there's not as much money flowing in the family for lessons and stuff, I would make the case that it's really valuable if that person wants to get good at music to know that this might be really worth putting some resources in on the faculty side, because not only should that be available for anyone who wants to learn music, this person, because of this weird combination of having super high aptitude and low financial resources, I would say that this gives even more reason to arm them with resources if possible. Not that you shouldn't do that with anyone who's super interested to learn, but it's extra sad in my mind for someone to be even deprived of more resources if they're interested and their aptitude is there. So I think that's like kind of a moral, a good moral use of the aptitude test, and not just like, stacking your music studio with students with absurd aptitudes or something like that.
Yeah, Gordon, I think Eric went and grabbed, forgive me, my screen changed, so I don't know if Eric went and grabbed it, but I think he went and grabbed the book. And if I remember right, in the very beginning of that book, he has those same philosophical questions right at the beginning to say, these are the ways it can be used. We recognize that it can be used poorly, but, like any tool, and all those same reasons. And having had the privilege and life experience to teach in and test the aptitudes of children in some of the poorest places in America, and I've done it, and some of the richest places, it happens to be those richest places were overseas, but they were, mostly still Western students, if you want to subtract out the confounding factors of the kids that were brought up in Arabic tonal scales and everything, although they scored bell curve along with everybody else, including some of the highest aptitude kids I ever taught being, not even familiar with Western music and still crushing Gordon map tests, everything in between. I do believe that aptitude is quite generously sprinkled across the world, at least in my experience of 20 years of giving this test, and not rich and not poor in terms of financial resources. So yeah, we're using the test with wisdom, which I think Gordon continually begged for. It'd be a net positive, but I absolutely get how anything that looks like it begins the process of winnowing or separating humans into various categories can always seem like a little bit creepy and eugenic-y or something like that.
Yeah, because there could be a similar phenomenon where I don't know if you guys have heard of stats like this, where if you look at the IQ of like Nobel Prize winning scientists, you actually don't need an astronomically high IQ to be a groundbreaking scientist. You actually need a pretty modest IQ compared to how high some people's IQs can get. And there's probably something similar going on with aptitude, where if you have a high enough aptitude, it probably doesn't have to be in the stratosphere. You can go a long way because, at a certain point, if someone's, like a percentile higher than you or something like that, I think other factors start coming into play. Like, and I've seen this with myself. I would rather have students who seem to have lower aptitude but have way more of an intrinsic desire to learn music. They're willing to actually put the time in and practice and work with you, rather than maybe someone who's a little higher and they just can't be tamed. Like they don't want to. They're not even really interested in playing music, and that happens, right?
Yeah. No, I'm one of the middle of the road, middle high guys or of average guys that just loves it so much. I'm never going to stop, right? So how do you measure that? Early in life, like the grit.
It's funny you literally posted something about that this morning, Eric, and in some context you said to me at least the thing about the baby's curiosity seems to be already immeasurable. That curiosity in itself seems to be a kind of aptitude. So now, so the hunger to discover and to find out. And then what was it? It was an Einstein phrase, something about no problem can withstand sustained thought. So if you've got the drive and you got 1%, 2% higher aptitude than this person who isn't driven every day to tackle the same problems, well, there's your Nobel Prize winners that are shockingly just barely above genius level or whatever in IQ.
and how many?
But of course, the highest one measured, Marilyn Vos Savant. She's still alive. And literally, her last name is Savant, and she's like 208, 209, and without taking anything away from her, she's an advice columnist.
Yeah,
she certainly hasn't given us fusion or renewable energy or solved human dilemmas.
Can't hear you when you adjust your ear.
We missed the last part, but
it fell out. This person that with insanely high aptitude and hasn't solved any of our real true human dilemmas.
Yeah.
I think sustained time on task, whether that's driven by love or curiosity or anything, is powerful in achievement, of course, with aptitude notwithstanding.
Mm-hmm.
So, musical sensitivity balance for lower scoring students. Emphasize for the student rhythmic balance through the examination and reading of poetry. Another one. Emphasize for the student rhythmic balance through the functions of tempo and meter and artistic musical phrasing. Emphasize for the student tonal balance through the functions of tonality and keyality and the awareness of melodic contour. And the last one for lower scoring students is acquaint the student with short or simple musical forms as a basis for creative work. And then for higher scoring students, the student should become a member of a group that improvises either instrumentally or vocally or both. Jazz and all types of folk music experiences are instructive and usually enjoyable. Introduce the student to the comparative differences between traditional and contemporary approaches to composition. Provide the student with sophisticated instruction in music composition. Melodic harmony and rhythmic factors should be stressed in terms of their interaction with the structural design of music. So that's what he's suggesting for just that subtest.
So I'm thinking of, I'm already thinking of so many potential exercises that would be worth exploring. Like we talked about this on the last episode or two that we had Ron on, but I've often thought about this exercise where you listen to like, choose a really good composer, good sense of balance, like Mozart or something ridiculous like that. Let's just listen to, a sentence or a period, just the first half, and try to improvise variations on how those should be completed.
On that consequent phrase.
Yeah, exactly. And suspend listening to his version for a while. And I have a feeling after enough of this kind of practice, whether or not your actual aptitude is going to go up, I think your achievement would go up, because I've done this a lot. I was doing this with John Williams melodies for 6 months or so. I would listen to the first section of a melody, and I'd go for a walk and just sing a response to it, and then I'd put it away and do it with another one, and I'd wait like a week before I actually listened to the punchline. And man, sometimes you're just like, okay, now I see why John Williams is John Williams, because I'm not coming up with those kinds of answers, even just on a pure rhythmic level. And so that, I could see an exercise like that even happening in chanting. So just getting rid of, like if a student was struggling with the rhythmic side of balance, you could strip it down to chanting, where there was just a basic phrase with an answer, and then maybe honing more in on the melodic contours. And this is why I think we need to. I'm so impressed with the level of research that went into this, but I would love to see a modern version of balance redone. Because I don't see why we couldn't do it. In fact, it'd probably be easier to do now because of the technology available to us, and us validating with really good musicians, having an eye or an ear on things. It would be cool to see, because 15 minutes is a long time, to take a test for. I think a lot of students, even in high school, asking that level of focus of somebody. But for people like us, who I'd be willing to sit through a half an hour version of this, and it had more questions. And I think a lot of professional musicians would be too. And we could even, because how many, Ron, you've had a few students who have gotten 30 out of 30 on this, right?
Quite a number over time.
Then I start thinking, how many of those, like, it would get split into other categories. Like maybe one of them would just get 60 out of 60, and then one of them would be more of the like 50 out of 60. Like I'm somewhere in the, like, I don't know.
And to me, that's where you'd begin to like, did you notice the last suggestion Gordon had essentially defined the test? Look at structural balance and rhythmic balance and harmonic balance and melodic contour, and as it relates to form. And it's like, to me, that's the essence of the test in the first place. So that last one kind of seems a little redundant almost, but to me, those insanely high aptitude people taking a more granular version of the test, you'd start to be able to tease out those different factors. Okay, only the people that get 30 out of 30 on this go take this next version that includes those same 30 questions, but there's 30 more in there. And maybe we can start to tease out as they miss some that, that's why when I started to understand these things with Gordon, I begged that man to let me see the questions that didn't make it onto the test. I wanted to study those from the mindset of thinking, okay, maybe this question should have been targeted only at the 28, 29, and 30 crowd, and could have been a really finer discrimination in a particular area, but it didn't serve for a test that had to be this short. He was making all those compromises
for sure.
And but I never got to see those questions. And if they exist in a vault somewhere in South Carolina, then I will at some point in my life.
Yeah, hopefully someone knows those to you.
Validity is what talking about.
A question I have, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about this. So the test, each one of these sensitivity tests is around 15 minutes. So for a teacher like me, I have a lot of private students. I could see certain students that I have totally cooperating and taking the test, but how do we feel about interpreting the results of a test if I was to, 1 week give student 3 questions, record their answers, next week do the next 3, just to cut down on the, I only do a half an hour lesson with them. I'm sure it'd still be interesting to see that, but how much do you guys think that the fatigue aspect of just being assaulted with 30 questions in a row plays into the proper interpretation of the results themselves?
I think it would be minimal.
Minimal in the sense of you'd be fine with the result.
Effect.
Yeah.
I tend to agree, and have been guilty for years of giving these tests in slices that felt just like a better thing to do for both humanity and my varied needs for my particular time frame for students. And yet I feel like if it's lifted, the results simply from the cognitive fatigue load, then that rising tide seems like it would lift all boats anyway. If everyone's taking the same test under the same constructs, and I think the results still are useful if they wouldn't be absolutely the same.
It's borne out in the statistics, really. It like when you get down to the descriptive, the statistics, and how you measure reliability, and how how do you measure whether these directions said exactly the way they're said, and then you've got to do the universe. You got to give it to tens of thousands of kids.
So that's where what I was saying before about cognitive fatigue causing issues with test results, in the sense that if we give someone the test, so you can't hit pause, you just got to run with it the whole time. Versus if we gave the same test to someone and said, if after a few questions you just need to pause and take 30 seconds and just collect your thoughts, just so your attention is not being shepherded away from, because I could really see when I was with Ron, you just know you're being watched. I could feel my attention getting pulled away from actually focusing on the melodies slightly. And if it shouldn't influence the results of the test, then I'm wondering if that would be a useful thing to offer people, just to not have to get them to take it multiple times. Because I'm willing to take it as many times as I need to, but I don't necessarily want to give this, 4 times to my piano students or my guitar students.
Right.
Unless they enjoy it.
I told you about the one kid that, for me, a room full of kids, one of my earliest experiences giving these tests, room full of students that exhaled, because I just went right through it, push play and don't stop no matter what. A room full of kids who exhaled like, whoo, wow. And one kid at the same time going, that was fun. And he's the world-class pianist now.
Which makes sense. I mean, when you're good at things, it feels good.
I think if you want to measure aptitude accurately, the higher the score, the more likely you are capturing a true measure of aptitude. That's what seems to make sense to me. So if you reduce the cognitive load in any other area, from whether it's stress or being watched or just fatigue or not ready for that next question for whatever reason, just had to adjust in my chair, and and I wasn't really ready to listen to that, then that lack of attention on the moment, to me, is obviously, would be reducing the likelihood that we're getting a perfect measure. So I would imagine,
or hypothetically, what if you had a student with ADHD who had like perfect balance aptitude as far as it can be, but their ADHD is causing them problems to even pay attention? Then you're kind of measuring, you could be measuring ADHD when they get questions wrong. Like these are just ideas that come up, when I start thinking about the validity of these tests. And I'm sure that on the whole, these things are accounted for, but I think they are, valid to some degree especially when you start throwing kids into the equation.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're measuring something that you're going to use for the betterment of your teaching. That's really, if you don't want to use that for the purpose, if that's not your purpose for giving the test, then don't give it, right? Because or you could use it as I suppose you could use it as its own criterion, reference number.
You could use it to interview your teachers. Like, I'm looking for a new composition professor, take these tests and send me the score back, and then we'll see if we can work together. Because I need someone with, apparently I need someone with a really advanced sense of style. And so I'd probably benefit from someone who has better tempo decision-making and composition process based on my, score.
Fill in the gaps where you're less weaker.
When I hired a friend of mine onto the staff of Emirates International School, his name was Simon Russell Baker. Simon, if you're out there in Australia right now, I love you. Simon Russell Baker, he was a consummate kind of Elton John-esque stylistic was his favorite, and he sung it beautifully. But he, totally taught by ear. Wouldn't know the names of the chords he was playing. I remember him telling me, I just think of this one as the Phil Collins chord, and he had these different names for things that he had made up. Great ear, good beautiful improviser, beautiful singer. And I wanted him immediately on the staff because I heard him, and I thought, this guy, no matter what his aptitude for improvisation, it's going to dwarf mine. And I told Eric this story. He and I were proctoring officially other students taking the balance subtest. I wanted Simon to understand just how comparatively naturally dumb I am in this particular area, this particular sunlit domain, as compared to him. So he didn't need to. These are nice kids. We didn't need 2 people walking around the room to make sure they're not cheating on the balance test. But that's what the kids thought was happening, when really I was just showing him with a finger. I'd put one finger up to my cheek if I thought the answer was 1. I'd put 2 fingers next to my chest if I thought the answer was 2. And the kids, now this is, of course, tests that I had given long enough that I value them enough. This is years into me giving this test. And I will never forget, it was somewhere in the teens as well, where I had gotten enough wrong, and Simon's reactions were always like an eyebrow up and a chin pulled back, even if he was across the room, at the ones I was getting wrong. And one of the questions came along that I at least took a little bit of the emotional strain off of me for showing my iniquities so clearly to this man. And it was a question I remember shrugging my shoulders like, well, duh, everybody. I was trying to tell him that this question doesn't count because anybody can hear that it's 2 or 1 or whatever answer I said. And he recoiled so physically and viscerally, even though he was across the room from me. It was like I had put a wriggling half a cockroach in front of his face. And I paused the test in the room, and I apologized to the student. I said, I'm so sorry. I have to say something that's to Mr. Baker. And we walked out of the room, and I said, Simon, tell me why on that last one. And I will never, as long as I live, forget his answer, because it certainly works with why the tests are called sensitivity tests. His answer was really quite simple. He went, because ew. Because ew. Now, you've said, Beau, that you caught yourself laughing on the test, at least without me watching, and you could be more of just Beau interacting with this music.
Oh, yeah,
The comedy side of it would be exactly that, until you've crossed the comic line, like I obviously did with Simon. And it's just like, ew, how could you,
I experienced that a lot on the phrasing one. On the phrasing one, it was there. Well, there's a couple experiences. One is laughter, and I remember experiencing this with the tonal aptitude test. I've only taken it twice, but I remember there was one like Mixolydian melody, I think, vaguely, and 2 of the tones were switched. Like there was a little pattern that was switched, and I remember laughing and thinking like, "Oh, that's the person who designed this is trying to trick me by doing that. That's the joke." But more so in the phrasing one, it was more of a visceral disgust. Like that is not good. And in the balance one, I felt more like, that's funny. The person is trying to trick me by doing it like this, and you kind of see what they're pointing at. But I think that's a great description.
And for me, because the phrasing one of the big 3, the order they go in, the first time I took them in order. The big 3 is phrasing, then balance, then style. And I already knew I didn't have the world's highest tonal aptitude, so I was okay with finding out the results of melody. And I was actually pleasantly surprised that my harmonic aptitude was a little inch higher than I would have guessed it from my life experiences being around musicians. And I knew my rhythm aptitudes were going to be strong, if not really, really high, and they were really, really high. Then I take phrasing, and so this is the first of the sensitivity tests, the first one that asks you to make these weird judgments like better. And I remember thinking this test was ridiculous. Who needs this? But I didn't realize my own high aptitude in that area was being measured. And then the second one being so low for me, and the third one being the style test being so high for me. It was good for me personally, for my understanding of music learning and teaching and being able to tease out different factors. For me personally, it was certainly good that balance was the second one. My experience. But then I could reflect on style and phrasing and realize, oh, that's really is measuring something that comes so effortlessly to me that it wouldn't have struck me as something other people had to learn or be taught. You just do it. You just hear it. And I think the higher your aptitude is, the more blind you are to these things even being factors in learning. And of course, I would imagine at the extreme low end as well, that you'd be blind to it for a different reason.
I showed a couple of my friends, I was describing these tests to them, and we were on Zoom this morning. And at some point I was like, let me just show you an example, because I was describing the way the balance test works. And they're all musicians in the group. One of them, not so much, but a little bit of musical training. So they're all kind of interested in what I'm talking about. And I showed them the examples. And the one guy he's a great guitar player and he's a songwriter. He was like, is this seriously a question? And like, and I believe it was the second example on the second practice question on the balance test. And he was like, is that seriously a question that someone, like, why are we testing this? That was his response. So I'm very interested to hear see his results. They're all willing to do it, so we'll see what comes out of that. But but I very much felt like that on the tonal test. There were a couple that stumped me, because I took it once with Eric, and then I bought the online version and took it a few times. And there were a couple where I felt fatigued. I think it was the longer length melodies that were played, but I more so had that feeling that you're describing.
Yeah, sensitive musicals. The recording, I hear the man's voice. Musical sensitivity.
Yeah, they got a good voice actor on those.
Yeah. I mentioned the same thing to Ron. I said, I want to know the name of this guy.
Oh, Gordon told that story. He was the original Marlboro Man as well. So if you find the absolute first commercials where the guy's sitting on horseback on a ridge side with a golden sun setting and he's smoking a Marlboro, you'll hear the same voice. And I remember Gordon telling me the punchline to it being, he died of throat cancer later. But yeah, so the guy's voice was also a commercial actor that was the original Marlboro Man. So that beautiful voice on the Musical Aptitude Profile. Just G, smoke Marlboros, have a great day. You could, what a voice.
It is.
Did he pick him, or did he call a studio and they supplied him with that guy?
I don't know the answer to that one. I don't know how it came to be
curious
the person.
Like he heard that commercial and said, I would like that man.
I suspect early on they really thought they were. I can imagine there was money behind it, because maybe he was making something groundbreaking. They thought they were going to make a mint off of this, so let's spend a little dough to hire this guy as to count up to 30.
Oh, yeah.
and then turns out that every great idea is first ridiculed and is attacked and finally taken for granted. So it's been ignored largely and attacked. And, trying to tease out the artistic sensitivities to this, you get why these questions would be, for the people who it comes naturally to, they can't understand, like you said, your friend saying, is that even a question? I did this one on style once, and it was the last one. And I'm quite certain, since the first time I took it, I got 30 right, and next time I took it, I got 30 right. And it's like, well, this test, who needs this stuff? And one time taking it with my students, just out of nowhere, I would sometimes when they were weary about actually doing it, I would simply say, well, if you'll do it, I'll do it right along with you. Just enough to get them to, okay, we'll do it, you silly old man. And I remember once, when I glanced at it, I'm like, oh, I missed the last one. And I think, yeah, you didn't miss the last one. You just stopped paying attention because it was too easy. So if your friend misses any at all, find out if he misses any of the last 2 or 3. Your friend that looked at that.
Oh, so it's interesting. When I did style, I have my results here. The first 16, I got 1 wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all right. And then I started making mistakes on the back half. Mm-hmm. So there's a few mistakes between 17 and 24, and then a few on the very end. But I remember I was having to explain that to my friend, that because he was like, "Is this really a question?" And I was saying, like, some people actually can't honestly make a decision between these two, and that's what this is. That's what this is, having a hand in. And I've seen it more with I've administered the tonal and rhythm aptitudes more to people, and I've seen that more on that front. But I think these tests are really interesting. Whether you're a teacher or if you're an adult musician interested in growing your own musical abilities, I think it provides you like a really good, musical baseball card of what should you put time into. Like if you're a 30 or 40 or 50-year-old musician and you've probably hammered on the things you're good at, for 10,000 hours, where can you get the most gains in your practice time? It's probably the areas where your aptitude sucks compared to the other ones. And that for me, it opens up a lot of interesting conversations about how to structure your practice time. Because if you're not great at phrasing, but everything else is just off the charts, maybe a large part of your practice time should be spent, take a piece you're learning and listen to different versions by different professionals, and maybe even some versions with some amateur musicians to throw some questionable performances in there, and see if you can really start to pick up on, like, well, why when, John Williams, the guitar player, plays this Bach piece, it really is better than when this random kid on YouTube is playing it. Not necessarily, but because you have to learn this stuff inductively. You have to learn it through actual musical examples. And it's not like a teacher explaining it can't have some help, but it's at some point it's like a teacher explaining why a tonic chord sounds different than the minor six or something like that. It's just the verbal description is not even in the right universe of cognitive functioning to give you the skill.
One's a sign and one's a symbol, as Gordon would say in his rabbit hole he had to go down. Yeah. That for me, that way that you would say, hey man, maybe a more effective use of your time would be to put a little bit more meat on the lowest aptitudes. I'm going to say her name because it's come back to me. Her name was Hess-Marie Gravenstein. So Hess-Marie Gravenstein, if by some bizarre consequence you ever come across this, thank you for what you helped me understand, that you helped thousands of students after you. She, again, sky high of 6 of the 7, low on meter. And Gordon told me to do something with her that I did, and it worked. She would hold a chair in my classroom and swing it side to side, almost like a human being getting to experience what a pendulum experiences of a weight shift as it comes down and goes across. And his intuition about it, which makes perfect sense to me, is that if she's insensitive to imbalance, she'd teach herself a way to walk that doesn't involve imbalance, so gravity doesn't cause her to keep falling down. But that solution for gravity was then a complete stop. She was a Ferrari with a broken hose to her overall musical achievement, until she can then, with the safety of being a grown-up, learn how to use and physically feel imbalance so that her brain could then know what a true ictus felt like. And then her mind can build the substructure of meter on top of that, And she And so part of our lesson time was spent swinging heavy objects around, and she turned into a capable sax player on things that I wasn't teaching, that she would have learned. She couldn't learn holistically because one of the areas was so low compared to the others. So fascinating to me that her tonal achievement started just showing up, skyrocketing, and we weren't working on singing in tune or practicing. So if the mind is modular, and Gordon has teased out at least some of the ways these different modules operate by themselves, you get the kid with one of those areas that's super low and or super high, and I think they're like the wonderful test case for at least being able to tease out even more of what is probably going on at the deepest levels of cognition.
Yeah. What here's my thing. You find those kids that are deficient, right? And you put them in a functional MRI, and then you put the high scores in there, and you look at the brain. Look at the brain of this group and this group. High and low, nobody in the middle.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Wouldn't that be just the most ridiculous thing to do? Would just be, I could die happy.
No me too. Me too.
Well, that's what it's going to be.
Even if it,
I think.
Yeah.
Like I want to know the on any of these aptitude measures, the space between the first and the second item, or the first and the second pair in any item, like the decision-making piece, like, you've got both, you've heard both, now you got to make the decision. I don't think I said what I think you heard what I meant. So right before you circle you don't have enough time to play them back. What is going on in the brain
Well, that's what I was saying to Ron. Is there are some questions? There's probably like 7 questions in that room, 7 or 8 on the balance test, where I made my mind up on question 1, and I knew I had to listen to the other one to fully sign off. But I could tell in both. I remember feeling like there were quite a lot of questions where I could already tell number 1 was the right answer, and I just needed to listen to a little bit of the ending of 2 to make the decision. Or vice versa, I could tell that 1 was already going to be wrong, unless number 2 was going to be even more ridiculous. And that for me proved that for me, I feel like those questions, the decision that's being made is of a different quality than the ones where I listen to both, and then for a second I'm like, I think it's 2. You know, feels like 2, but there's a difference in the ones where it's like I already knew it was 1, like at the beginning. And I remember having the tonal aptitude and rhythm aptitude tests. They're different in a sense because you're actually being asked if it's the same or different. So you kind of do have to wait for the end of the second example. There's not the same ability to size it up in a sense. But I remember having similar feelings, more in the tonal aptitude one than in the rhythm one. But I agree. I think like whatever we end up using, whether it's like EGs or fMRIs or something new that's going to come out, that's where this is going to go for sure. I mean, I'm wondering. I just want to know what we can do to actually make this grow more on purpose, not just like participate in more music, but actual something that's like an LSA for balance that you can drive in with a reasonable degree of impact on somebody. There was a paper done by, I think her name's Susan Williams, on this paper just came out. It's on instrumentalists. They were using natural trumpet players for this experiment, but it was basically just making them audiate what they play before they play it in the practice room. And to her credit, she actually brings up Gordon and audiation. She brings up Gordon in the paper, which is super surprising if you're reading anything about music education research. She brings up Gordon, and she develops this thing called the audiation practice tool. And really, the audiation practice tool is just before you play something on your instrument, you have to mentally audiate it and sing it, enact it with gestures, and then play it on the instrument. And to no surprise to any of us, the group, when the groups did that, they performed better by a judge listening to them, and their accuracy technically was slightly higher. And I think that's just such a good example of something that seems obvious to us, but maybe is not obvious to the music world at large.
Who was I talking to, or were you talking to me, or is this something I picked up just recently? The X game athletes that do the triple flips and land and then come back and do another super thing. Before they go, they do their whole routine in their body. You can see it. They're living, right? And those are the gold medal winners, are the ones that always, right, have do that. Now everybody's learning how to do that, to play it mentally in your mind before you go and do it, because if you don't, they're toast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I saw to that end, at least on the physical and athletic side of it as well. I saw an interview with a Olympic diver. She talked about, somebody had asked her, why do you do that little head waggle and thing as you're just before you step out to the edge, you're going to do the dive. And she says, I'm physically experiencing it, and it was so wonderful because to the person's credit doing the interview, she said, well, how deeply do you feel the kinesthetic feel of flipping through the air? And she's like, when I do it internally with at my maximum, the experience of the dive and the physical true dive and the internalized experience are absolutely mirrors of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, sure, that makes perfect sense to me too. It's like, Hindemith didn't fly to America to hear the premiere of one of his 4 greatest masterpieces and being done by, I forget, Robert Shaw is conducting. Shaw was the commissioned it, And so one sentence denial. Do you think you can play it better than I can hear it? You know,
That's great.
you know, it seems to me the obvious answer to that would be no. You know, that if he's truly audiating every moment of his compositions, you know, which there, if you go deeper into that story and you go down a little rabbit hole, that particular anecdote, Shaw was so dazzled by certain things that Hindemith was forced to do in terms of the actual composition of it that he left out whole sections. And then later on, Shaw found, you know, that he would just mail him and he would slot it into the score, and they also fit perfectly, like every quaver lined up and all this, you know. And it's like, you know, he'd already finished the whole thing in his head, you know, and you're talking about an hour and a half, you know, symphonic and vocal piece with organ. And if you ever get to know When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloom, that's a specific piece I'm talking about.
Say it again.
When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. It's you know, its nickname is the Hindemith Requiem, and what an absolute! That's one of my desert island pieces.
We'll link it in the show notes.
But yeah, it's dense and opaque and unbelievably complex and beautiful and moving. But you know, you think you can play it better than I can hear it? And I think the masters of the kinesthetic side, to bring it back, I think that makes sense to me why Rachmaninoff, you know, they would listen to him practicing, or they'd sneak to hear the master practice, and he only ever did any kind of slow practice. That's all he needed. Mm-hmm. Just get a couple of shoulder tension out or here and there, and the rest is quote unquote easy for these people.
One of the things I find really interesting about this Susan Williams research, I believe that's her name, and then there's another colleague, I think her name is Gabby Wolf. She does a lot of research on motor learning and the importance of having external locus of attention. And it's so fascinating for musicians because, you know, what happens when a musician chokes? They tend to stop focusing on the sound or what they're audiating, and they focus more on muscular movements and making those technically accurate. You know, this whole line of research shows that it's fine to have some kinesthetic awareness, and that's even probably a skill in and of itself. If you don't learn how to develop good kinesthetic models of what your body's doing, you know, you're going to be at a disadvantage. But I think the bigger problem for a lot of instrumentalists is that they're not actually focusing on what they're auditing. They're focusing on what their hands and their fingers are doing. And so, you know, her research, their research showing getting ways for musicians to, especially instrumentalists, because it's less likely to happen with singers and certain kinds of performers, but instrumentalists, guitar players and piano players specifically, who look at keyboards and fretboards, it's so visual. Like the fretboard for me is like this beautiful labyrinth that just lights up all these harmonic, you know, possibilities. It's a harmonic map that you can see. But you know, these kinds of just simple practice advice to actually sing what you're going to play, or try to audiate in your mind before you play it, or listen to an example before you play it. I think those are just so useful to have for teachers. And I want more things like this for sensitivity training, because I think when teachers get involved in MLT, there's so much emphasis on tonal and rhythm patterns that we start viewing music through the lens of everything as a tonal and a rhythm pattern. And obviously there's nothing wrong with doing LSAs or any of that, but a huge part of becoming a musician is actually these other factors that the sensitivity test is measuring. And if you don't train that and give examples of that to students, it's unlikely they're just going to develop that unless they're being exposed to a really high quality music consistently. I think maybe that's why Ron's style is just style and phrasing is just off the charts, because you grew up, you know, around great musicians. From what I heard, maybe you just soaked that up for some reason.
I would love to be able, if they would ever agree to test my siblings on these tests, but I can't ever get any of my siblings to take any of these to find out how much of that might be just, you know, Just hearing my dad, improvise at the organ from literally from my birth,
Mm-hmm.
and it's funny you mentioned the researchers Wolf and Williams, and some part of it when you said when musician chokes, and I would want to know, like, if you define choke as what drew you out of that flow state that we've all been in at least some point in our life, and then when it gets interrupted, you realize you were in a flow state. You didn't even know you were there, kind of, except that somehow you knew you were really performing at a high level, and the world had slowed down, even the musical world, so to speak. You're performing in tempo, but you're so far ahead of it, it's just easy. I would want like a grand unified theory of learning that included whoever it is, zone of proximal development, that is about.
Oh, Vygotsky.
Yeah, where does that factor into, an MLT that didn't stay, like you said, so tone and rhythm pattern development focused, which is obviously super valuable, but yeah, it might be still too narrow for a worldwide revolution of music education that's beneficial to all kids. And to me, some of that would include these non-musical factors that just bump you out of your flow state of learning and that kind of stuff. So that kind of stuff's just always fascinating to me.
And vertical harmony.
Oh, Eric, you are cracking.
I'm gonna give it.
You are.
So this is another episode we should have Ron back on. But so I sent Eric a recording of this Bach piece I was working on, and then I sent him a version of John Williams play it. And Eric was like, "What did you say?" You're like, "Yours has a really good sense of harmonic flow to it," which is interesting because we're playing the same notes, So like, what's going on there with the phrasing? Like, why did you? What were you picking up on? And I think that's just an interesting conversation. And it would fit with all the stuff we're talking
and
about.
I didn't hear any flaws. I didn't hear anything that was like, I would fix that. Oh, that's just a finger trip or anything like that. I just heard it's fine. It's ready to go. And Ron said, no, Beau said he's going to tweak it. He's still got west to go. And,
Yeah.
And like, I didn't hear it.
Yeah. The harmonic, the harmonic side is just so fascinating. I think sometimes classical musicians, especially unless they're composers, tend to think like the kind of training we're advocating is really only useful for jazz musicians or improvisers, but it influences your ability to even interpret a piece if you don't have a proper sense of the harmonic punchlines and the harmonic rhythm. It changes the way you phrase, like radically. I would say even if your phrasing is good, like you play a melody and you have a good sense of where the dynamics should line up, I would claim that if you don't have the harmonic punchlines there, I don't know how you would make the same intuitive decisions about where. Maybe that's part of. It's funny, Ron. You mentioned you were surprised your harmonic aptitude was higher than it is, or higher than what you thought it would be. But maybe I think part of yours the phrasing skill set, it might need some of that to be that high in a sense, because you might need to have this sense of because I don't think anyone's surprised phrasing. You need a good sense of meter and rhythm to make choices about dynamics and articulation. But I think the harmonic side is smuggled in there as well to some degree, and that's why it'd be so fascinating to let's say we have these 7 aptitudes we're measuring. To have profiles of people that are like strong in all of them but 1, strong in all of them but 2, strong in all of them but 3, because I essentially believe they are like different types of diseases. Sounds a little intense, but if you use like a deficiency model, like you're deficient in iron, so you have these symptoms. You're deficient in iron and magnesium, so you have these symptoms. I think we would find certain similarities among these, but that's a tall order,
I experienced things exactly like that over the course of the time, especially my most sort of what I would describe as my greatest illumination on the nature of teaching and learning and aptitude and the interactions of achievement and aptitude was a time, sort of, I had already known Gordon's work for the better part of 10 years, and I felt like I was really into it. then I was just applying it, and so I had students like that, and I had very easy predictions. Well, if this is this kid's brain, then it should look like this. And then I tried to hold the predictions at arm's length, so I wasn't causing them to happen. And then whatever they call that,
the self-fulfilling prophecy.
So thank you. That's exactly what I was trying to think. I know there's also another version of that that's fancier term, but yes, exactly. And so, but what I've never seen, one of the things I've never seen, I'm not suggesting it doesn't exist. I've never seen the student score relatively low across the board on all the data gathering sides of things, the first 4 tests, and score sky high on the sensitivity ones. So what you said a moment ago about, you got to have at least a little bit of meter to deal with the phrasing. I think there's definitely overlap there. I've seen the opposite. I've seen sky high across the board on the first 4, shockingly low across the board on the back 3. And it may or may not surprise you that each one of the students that ever fit that bill was autistic.
Yeah. I mean, that to me makes a case for just this like genetic absurd ability to detect tonal and rhythm changes. Not something that was even necessarily coming from intense musical exposure. Maybe if you have those kind of genetics, some exposure to an environment with musical tones just lights those abilities up. There's
that famous autistic blind pianist that was on 60 Minutes, and I would want to give that man the back 3 sensitivity tests, man.
Yeah.
I'd want to see what his mind did with them. Because he plays anything at all that he hears and he never forgets it. But if you listen to it, it does fundamentally lack artistry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me.
I'm looking at this is another 3 hours of talk right here. Just the intercorrelations.
Yes,
among the subtests. The intercorrelation with like phrasing with tonal is 0.29. The tonal 1 and 0.29 for tonal 2 and 0.33 for the tonal test combined. That's phrasing. So balance. It's like, what is its intercorrelation with the rhythm subtest? It doesn't get above 0.54 for the composite. And then balance with the other two, 0.46 and 0.55. It's like, so the intercorrelation is just how much each subtest is contributing to the whole.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So kind of gets at these questions, and they're definitely measuring unique factors because there's still a fair amount percent not accounted for by these intercorrelations, and that's the more validation that he's measuring unique characteristics of your music aptitude. Taking this, it's an extraordinary book. It's mind-boggling.
What book is that?
This is the Music Aptitude Profile Manual.
Yeah. Okay.
What I read from earlier. It has all the stats and all the studies. And
I know Ron has to run in a minute, but one other thing I did want to bring up that I think is important is that, so from what I understand, is that norms were not evaluated for the map, the sensitivity part of the test after a certain age range. Is that the case? Was it 18? Is that what we were speaking about?
Yeah. The norms were developed for music. So that musically, what do you call it? Gifted. What did he call them? Music.
Musically. What I want to know is what are good scores on the sensitivity tests?
4th graders to 9th graders, to 12th graders.
Okay, but so let's just take the oldest age range because that's what we're closest to. What are considered? we're sure close. What are considered high scores for the
musically select? So there's musically select in each of those categories from 4 to 12.
Yeah. So grab the one he's asking, Eric, if the column you're going to look for then is the one that's music select 10th, 11th to 12th graders, because that's the highest set of norms that Gordon established. So comparing those norms to you, me, and Beau is probably as close as we're going to get to finding out how strong or dire each of these different areas is for us. So he's asking what's a high score for balance for a musically select 10th, 11th, and 12th grader.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
And if memory serves, it'd be about 26 or 27 raw score. But Eric's got to flip pages between the raw scores and the statistical and the percentage.
For the test that we're talking about, sensitivity 2. These are already converted. The raw scores are already converted here in this table. So you got to convert the raw scores so that they equal the same weight as any of the other subtests. So it says, an 880. So I don't know what an 880.
Well, are you on the
percentile norms for the musically select students, grades 10, 11, 12?
Yeah.
And the scores, the scores that he uses are converted raw scores. They're
right.
So when we mean just to clarify,
same thing as a raw score on meter, say.
Yeah. Just to clarify one thing for people listening, when the raw scores on this test is every item given the same weight. So if you get 26, regardless of which 26 you get right, regardless of which 4 you get wrong, is your score considered equal to someone else who gets 26?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think that's an important point to make. Is he giving more weight to certain questions based off how common it is that they're right or wrong? Because from what I remember, Eric and I did not get the same questions wrong, which is interesting. Which is mind-boggling in a sense.
and of the ones Eric got wrong, when I took it the next day, again, I'm a very invalid version of this test now because I've heard it so many times. So I only missed 3, but believe me, that's just because I've heard it 1,000 times. I'm far and away the dumbest group of a bunch in this particular domain of thinking. The 3 I got wrong, none of the 3 were the ones that Eric got wrong. And so when I had told him I thought he missed between 6 and 8, of course, 3 of the ones that I was incorrect about would have overlapped with the ones he got right, but I would have heard them as wrong. And so I wasn't exactly the right person to be. Don't make me a judge in this area. But no, for Eric to do this, Eric, if you went to the page that turns, it's one page that turns all the raw scores into SS numbers, find the SS that's around 62 and above, and they only go up to the highest 77 is SS scores, and then you'd find out what a high score in this area is. Because
no, I'm just there's how many pages you're putting me through? 161
no, I know.
pages.
Right. I was gonna say I know what you're dealing with.
Go to the front and find it.
It's unwieldy in the book. Yeah.
And then another question I would have is what's considered the average score for these tests? Is 20 low, or is 10, or is 20 average, or is 10 average, or I don't know if it's I don't know if there's a reason to think 15 would be average.
There were years when I would do these tests when I would violate one of the cardinal principles of this, which is don't ever tell the kids their aptitudes. And I felt like I had enough of a relationship with the students that we could begin to open up this sort of delicate Pandora's box of what constitutes what nature might and your early childhood might have given you. And these are the tools you have to work with, and what might constitute, just good old fashioned, working the tools. And so I will tell you this, 20 was like a threshold for me on these back end tests, where if you score 20 and above, don't worry, you're gonna be fine. Yes, the person that scored 29 is thinking faster than you in this area, but there's no deficiency here that I'm gonna ever worry about. So I definitely, in high school kids, 22-ish, and I was thinking 20 more for middle school kids. 20 and 22-ish was my, if you're scoring 22 and above, you're fine. We don't do anything special for your diet and care and feeding of your musical mind.
Well, it's good to hear, because I got 7 wrong on style, so.
But then again, think about what that test the discrimination that test is making you do on the style one, for the listeners that don't know, the style one simply plays the same melody twice, and the back end may, largely, there's almost no articulation style differences. It's strictly which tempo seems to suit this music better is the largest definition of that test, the most simple way.
I find that one hard to take because some of them were a little bit fucked up, but I liked it being fucked up. It was like, wow, this is like answering this would be a little messed up, but it's kind of cool. You know what I mean? Yeah, and then I'm like, does that mean I shouldn't choose that one? Or should I choose that? Like, if you listen to Glenn Gould play Turkish March, it felt like that. It felt like this is way too slow, but it's kind of cool.
If each of us has some native degree of potential to intuit whatever the expressive qualities are that are like the interaction, because now we're talking style, not balance, but if the expressive interactions from tempo as it relates to the rhythmic content, as it relates to articulation, if we each have some native version of that might have just shown up at the beginning of this podcast when Eric told me to articulate my speech better, that the pace at which I speak, simple pace at which my words come out of my mouth, compared to the consonants and this junky recording I'm making because I have earbuds in. If each of us has some kind of intuitive degree for knowing when a boundary has been crossed in the musical version, then I think that's the measure of aptitude. And then when you're in the middle of that, then that feeling comes that sort of, you don't have a low aptitude in this area. So now we're just in that world of debate. I can see how that could work. And that one comes out wrong, but it's more fascinating. Then we're no longer in the world of artistic argument as we are in the world of what's going to survive as a masterpiece 300 years from now that's been winnowed away by, the 1,000 people that exceed our aptitudes in these areas.
Sure. It is funny though, because in this range, like whenever I prepare like a classical guitar concert, I don't struggle in the sense of choosing tempo, but I practice pieces in a wide variety of tempos, and there's a huge boundary for many pieces, especially like Bach and stuff like that I'm pretty cool with, and I get like a sick satisfaction of it being messed with, and I do find it hard to say this should be it,
Yeah. So to quote my friend Simon Russell Baker again in that context, there is a wider margin for you of because you, but I promise you, if I listen to some of your tempo choices, I'm going to be having a because you moment here and there.
For sure.
That one is for me cardinal in terms of style, and it always has been. I there's things I just can't listen to from the beginning. It's hard for me to like listen to something. It's like, oh, why did they choose that tempo? And it ruins a piece of music for me. Sometimes an unfamiliar piece of music. Exactly. I'm having literally
that's cool. That's really cool.
I'm having the experience of the style test on an unfamiliar piece of music, knowing that the performer, even though I don't know the piece yet, has somehow chosen an appropriate tempo. I mean, it's been since my childhood.
Yeah.
And it probably, because I'm not facile in certain other areas, it probably overcolors my quote unquote CD set, my Spotify list of favorites.
Totally. A really funny example of that, this is with familiar music, but I was listening to this, the London Philharmonic or whatever it is. I don't know who the conductor was on the exact recording, but there was this one version of the Rite of Spring that I really liked, and for tempo reasons. And then I have the version that Stravinsky is actually conducting himself. And I don't like his tempo choices on many of the parts of the Rite of Spring. I'm like, he fucking wrote it. And so this conductor in London, he brought something out in that music that Stravinsky himself wasn't bringing out. And that really made me do a double take. And that's cool.
I've almost never liked composers conducting their own works for me either. And I'm sorry, if you take it to the next step, bring it back to Hindemith, you think you can hear it better than I can perform it, or you can perform it better, I can hear it. Now, what is Stravinsky actually audiating versus what he's conducting? He's seven phrases ahead, or 3 phrases behind, or Do you know what I mean? So I don't think very many. I believe we really do need conductors to interpret the works of some of the masters, and it's unsurprising, like for the breadth of tempi that you'll hear chosen for Beethoven's Fifth, the famous dum special movement, and go find the fastest and slowest versions of that, and it's just like wow. And there is a metronome marking that Beethoven wrote, and yeah, I don't agree with it.
So ask me the question again, where I had to...
Okay, I wanted to know what a high score is considered in the oldest age group that is in covered in that.
So if you get 30 on that sensitivity test, it converts to a standard score of 80, and the 80 then that's the 99th percentile, right? For that piece, piece of the pie. Okay. So when you get to, so what's average is a standard score of 57, and a standard score of 57 is getting 24. That's me.
That's standard.
That's 57. That's 50th percentile.
So that's higher than I thought it would be. Wow. That's the raw score is higher than I thought it would be for average.
Yeah, because I'm clumped in the middle with all the other people that get 6 wrong.
Huh. Interesting.
And if I remember right, if I remember right, do please publicly correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't looked at the book in forever, but I felt like on the sensitivity tests, the clump in the middle was larger. Like it was not a perfect bell curve, so to speak, for the sensitivity tests on all three. That
I feel like margins, it must be based on those raw scores.
Well,
and maybe that's just because it's a 30-question test, but I might be wrong about all that.
Well, and then we look at the mean and standard deviations and compare those means and standard deviations across the other sensitivity measures, and then of course the whole test across that, and
where my intuition would be that the test itself, 5 or 6 questions have to, for each person, even if they're not the same 5 or 6 questions, have to do the heavy lifting of discriminating at the top end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would imagine that's the case.
Yeah,
because Ron, you have to refresh my memory, but I believe there's a question that I got wrong twice on balance that you got wrong, which I don't know what that means because you struggle with the test in general, but it was like question 13 and 14 I got wrong on both tests.
When I took it the most recent time, I'm holding it now. I knew that's where you're going to go, so I'm holding it. I got 13 and 14 right. I missed 17.
Oh, you missed 17. Okay, yeah. I think I missed 13, 14, and 20 on both. Those are the only questions I missed on both.
I was though this most recent time was the only time I was driving while Eric was taking it, so I don't know what I got right and wrong, but I missed 17, 21, and 27.
Interesting. Yeah.
Most recent. And I know one of those 3. It must be 17. It's probably the same. It's probably the same one that Simon recoiled at. I know one of those. It's got to be 17. Every time it starts, my brain goes, "Oh yeah, this one just plays with my head." I just like impending feeling of dread. Like, wow, will this optical auditory this my student used to call them ear-particle illusions. Will this ear-particle illusion ever stop playing with my audiation?
Yeah, I feel like we need more interest. We need more research in like the. Obviously, all the sensitivities are fascinating, but I feel like the balance one specifically, for its potential on your ability to improvise, I think is super. The idea that you brought up before on this podcast, which I think is super interesting, and that's why I want us to find techniques that can help people generalize better in this area.
And maybe again, I'm always wary about generalizing from my own experience as well. Trying to think like a scientist, but we live the anecdotal world. And when I first got brave enough to write some of my blog posts and everything, I got so many compliments on how I write. And I want to always say to those people, I'm a terrible writer. I'm just an absolutely insanely dissatisfied editor. I'm a ruthless editor. So, and I probably overgeneralize that, but again, I think about the nature of a great improvisation, and it is a spontaneous, perfect paragraph, you know. And one of the students that, he's a composer now. He used to speak in perfect paragraphs in a second language. Mohammed Farouz, if you're out there and you were listening, and and of course he got 30 out of 30 on map. So I think there's something in all these comparisons between language and music. I can compose, but I can't improvise, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Let my improvisations run their course and then ruthlessly edit them. And I write the same way. I write the same way. I ramble and ramble, and then I have to, sometimes get a second eye on things too. And I just think, Charlie Parker taught in the musical version of paragraphs and full chapters.
Yeah.
So of the three sensitivity measures, the one that has the most clumping in the middle, where the standard deviation is the smallest, is phrasing, right? The mean is 22.5, and the standard deviation is 4.17. For balance, the mean goes down, right? And it spreads out a little bit. It's 4.55, but style is 4.68. So that's even a little bit more spread out, right? So that the lump, as you take those three in a row, the lump in the middle spreads out a little bit, right?
So if the mean for balance is what?
And then compare that. So balance is, and then I just want to put that in context. For melody and harmony, the standard deviation is 5.8, but the mean is larger, right? So you'd have to map those things on top of each other to really know, because they're not calculated from the standard scores. If you want to go by the standard scores, everything is really pretty level. So there isn't that much clumping in the middle. But if you're going to, if one was clumped, it would be, it would be phrasing, the first of them. So,
one thing I'd like to see, this is just a ridiculous area. I want to see if, basically drugs have effects on aptitude tests. It'd be really interesting to see if someone took like Adderall or used cannabis and took the sensitivity test, and that affected their processing speed or their performance scores. I feel like that would be really interesting to I have no idea what to even make.
I need to couch this next sentence carefully, because I don't want to sound judgmental, and I'm not on this. I have never once in my life performed high or drunk. Never, not once. I'm not against anybody, but I've heard anecdotes from other people who say, "Man, if I'm a little buzzed on this or I'm a little high on that, I just sail through things so much better." So I would imagine that whatever it is that I know, obviously for me, alcohol is it doesn't change my morals or anything. It just lets me finally stop lying to myself about what I wanted to do in the first place. The idea that alcohol just gives you permission to do what you already wanted to do. So I've never done anything on booze that I didn't want to already do, and my experience with marijuana is limited, but it exists. And I've never performed on these, but I would imagine that what is being tamped down. Certainly, I would imagine that by tamping down and just this social inhibition, somebody might be freer to
for sure.
Well,
to explore.
Charles Lim's work on this is when he takes a rapper, puts him under the fMRI, okay, and he feeds him a word. So now he's doing freestyle. So first he has the guy rap, something he knows,
and then he raps freestyle, but Charles is feeding him a word he has to include. Like, here's the word, and you got to put it in there and rhyme and keep your rhythm and all the stuff that a freestyler does. Brilliant, and the prefrontal cortex shuts down more when he has to improvise. And the same thing happens with people who have a solo memorized, and he developed a keyboard that doesn't have metal in it. So he's got a MIDI keyboard that doesn't have metal. So now they can play, keyboard while you're getting, zapped. And the same thing happens. You play something you've got memorized. When you're improvising, there's none of this. The prefrontal cortex is right. And so if you can get this out of your thinking out of the way, then you're freed up. And I look at like some of the master improvisers, Bill Evans and Charlie Parker, and how messed up were they? But then
that's
how
an
messed up
interesting.
would they, how would they have played had they not been messed up for that long? But Bill Evans was famously addicted to heroin.
Well, there's so many bebop musicians who you can make a case for. I mean, if you're going to make a case for people having ridiculous improv skills harmonically and melodically, I mean, that it kind of was a peak of musical innovation. Like, people just started doing other things because you just couldn't really, after a hard bop. I mean, it has still gone places, but now that's kind of something jazz musicians have to learn to emulate if they are going to be serious jazz musicians to a large degree. And these people were on insane amounts of stimulants and opiates. And so if you're going to make the claim that those things are detrimental, I just don't even see that being a possibility. But is there a possibility of stimulants specifically in potentially increasing like harmonic ideation or improvisation abilities, or potentially increasing the ability to learn those skills? But then again, we have examples that go the other way. Pat Metheny apparently has been sober his entire life and has never used any mind-altering substances. And I could be wrong. Sorry, Pat, if I'm putting words in your life history there. But that I'm under the impression that that's the case, and he's clearly not deficient in anything musically. But I do wonder about. Well, I would like to see someone take an aptitude test on Adderall, basically.
But he can do the same thing because he's taken everything out of his head and put it into his fingers the way that man practices.
Sure. But I think there's two. I think there's two conversations.
He can offload all the technique in the world. All he has to do is go up there and play. Because everything is offloaded so well because he's mastered it. I don't know that Charlie Parker was practicing 6 hours a day after he finally got to the point where he was a genius.
But hold on, there's two separate things going on here. One is that drugs have the ability to shut down, internal critique that can get in the way of your playing. And the other one is that do drugs have the ability to actually increase processing ability beyond the internal critic? I'm sure both are potentially. Well, I'm sure the internal critic being shut off is absolutely part of alcohol and other things being used. But I wonder more in the realm of stimulants with harmonic aptitude measures. I had used stimulants to small degrees just to see if they helped cognitive function years ago, and I do remember listening to chord progressions, and they felt just razor sharp in a way that they didn't when I was not taking the stimulants. So is that just a placebo novelty thing? I don't know, but I remember feeling like, wow, I'm really hearing something here that I wasn't hearing before, and I don't have that same experience now.
I can't even smell coffee without not being able to sleep at night. Right, so I am really highly sensitive. I'm really highly sensitive to caffeine. So
yeah.
All right. Well, we got to be mindful of Ron's time because we're gonna rope him into another 3 hours of. He's already 23 minutes.
Do we
late.
have intrinsic motivation to have so much joy talking about?
Yeah, you guys are.
Aptitude profile.
No, it's a joy I think it's a joy to try to parse these wonderful areas that Gordon contributed to, and that they're still muddy because correlation and causation and enough enough perfect examples of the student who scores sky high on all of them and low on one, or low on all of them and sky high on the other, and still gets taught effectively, that could teach us more about how much of this is true overlap, how much of this has our confounding factors of just personality that are non-musical, but of course they exist in our cognition and our day-to-day experience of the world. And I think as we begin to tease those things out more and more, that's exciting to me. It's worth me being late for what I've got to go to and talking to you guys. I heard someone say literally earlier today that that which truth can destroy should be destroyed. And it's like, if we're starting to get closer and closer to understanding the musical mind and the truth of what forgive me, Bill Evans, was it you said? I didn't know about his, was it heroin? I didn't know any of that until just now. That's new information to me that Evans was. So what would the two Bill Evans, one on heroin, one on not on heroin, but every other experience the same, which one would be the better musician? I would love to run that slide. What do they call that? The sliding glass thing, the door that you go through, and now that's the one partition, and everything else is the same. Yeah. We can't do those studies, but we maybe can get to the point where we start to tease these truths out.
Yeah, just see the research study now. Just a long pedantic title like musical sensitivity phrasing as measured by MAP. Increases 2 standard deviations for every 1 unit of heroin taken.
But look, you can look at it like this: that Bill Evans, if he thought for a second that anything he played wasn't up to snuff, I think he would quit. Because he didn't. He's flawless.
Oh,
and harmonic.
When I listen to him, I don't know exactly how it could be a combination of balance and phrasing, but there's something when you listen to Evans, the melodies they have a quality of just rational musical intuitive sense making to them that you don't often hear, even with comparisons being made next to great musicians. There's just it's like they're well composed, just as they come out of him, and it's just absurd. And I think that's same with Miles.
I heard someone compare Bill Evans and Miles, and get the next one, but to Beethoven and Beethoven's constant scribblings and re-editings, and the end result is that Bernstein used to describe as being absolutely inevitable one moment to the next, but they weren't inevitable. It's composing, because you could see the actual edits, and here's Evans doing it on the fly, and that's just so. I would want to give Beethoven the balance subtest and find out that Beethoven scores like I do, so he's a great thinker in these areas, but he has to be a ruthless editor before the quality shows.
Mm-hmm. That's another thing I'd like to see. It'd be really cool to have examples of, take some modern composers that are alive, give them tests, and just to show people this composer who's great, who's had all this success, their balance is average. And I think that would be very positive for the community, because I think a dark side of these aptitude tests and talking about them in a mature way is that we're just trying to find ways of helping musicians. We're not trying to having high aptitude, especially if you don't have any achievement, it really means fuck all. And it doesn't mean that you're better than another musician or anything like that. Someone just might not like your music, even if your aptitude is off the charts and you're a great composer. But I'd love to see more examples of that. Where,
we don't.
I'm sure they're out there.
Just if you imagine the rarefied person who would be scoring literally average exactly across the board on all the tests, we do not yet know with that nice equivalent mind. No part of their brain is overstressing another, but none of them are sky high, but their brain is working at a kind of equilibrium with the holistic aspects of music. If Gordon's tests measure the holistic, which they don't, but they get a whole lot of it. What is the achievement level of that person? And I believe that you're right. There can be a dark side to these tests when we underestimate just how great the average person could be if we could get inductive
especially with
teaching
proper
in each of
training.
these
Yeah.
domains and all that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
that subject I like to think of the Super Mario, because in all the Nintendo games where there's multiple characters, Mario, whenever there's statistics involved, like in Mario Kart or in a fighting game, Mario's always equal in everything, and he's a good analogy for that. And I think there's more of those than there's a lot of those kinds of musicians out there who are just pretty solid, across the board. And I mean, that's cool. Yeah.
And maybe it doesn't belong on this recording, but at some point, because I said this either to you, Beau, or you, Eric, and I'm only saying because I got to hang up for a possible future. I would love to invite a very articulate, very intelligent, very thoughtful former student of mine to come and be on your podcast at some point and let you quiz him. He's the pianist and composer Arsha Kaviani, who, scored sky high on all of these, missed a grand total as a 14-year-old out of the 250 questions of map, missed a grand total of 7 questions. And 6 of the 7 were in one area. And to me, I don't even factor in the other one. I don't remember which one it was, which test it was on, but it was one of the sensitivity ones. And so you're talking about at least for Gordon, a consummate genius, and he is. He was 14 or 13 when he took these tests.
Wow, that's crazy.
14. Yeah, and he missed. He was the one that one of the tests that was fun. Well, the rest of the room sounded like I had just browbeat them. Yeah, I bet he would be fun to chat with in a thoughtful manner about thinking about his thinking, because he's a very metacognitive person in that way. He enjoys that. He's a dynamite. So it must have been you, Beau, because you mentioned chess, and he's and he follows Magnus Carlsen, in his head, and likes to play chess games against Carlsen. So whatever that is.
There's some to be able to sit for 2 hours talking about it.
All right, gentlemen, I have to run. I got to run.
Bye. Have a great evening.
Same to both of you. Bye.
Bye. Oh my God.
Oh, that's great, man. Ron's great. I talked to him for a long time yesterday too. We talked for like an hour and 15 minutes before we even did the test. Yeah.
You said 2 hours and 45 minutes or something. That was after we did the
first time I talked to you, we talked for 4 hours. I don't think I've ever had to use the washroom that bad. Yeah, no, that's good. Ron's such a good guy. He's so smart, and he's just so good to chat with. Like he's so down to earth, and
he knows that test more than anybody on the planet.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy, eh? Yeah, man. The balance thing is so weird. So the questions you got wrong, I didn't get wrong on either test. Like, because you got the 3 that I did get wrong, 13, 14.
Wait. All right, so here, I should do this too. No, when I convert it. So the item difficulty and discrimination values.
Oh, so you have the difficulties of, I want to know the difficulties of 13, 14, and 20.
So item difficulty percent correct, discrimination item test correlation for each test for 3 levels. Which level are we at here? So, okay, so musical sensitivity, grade 10, 11, 12, that's, all right, here we go. So sensitivity, number 2, balance, right? All right, so what number?
I want to know about 13, 14, and 20, because I got both. Those are the only questions I got wrong on both tests.
All right. So the difficulty items range between 58, which is the most difficult, and 81, which is the first question on the test. And
so wait, lower is more difficult?
yeah, it
Okay.
should be, difficulty should be called easiness.
Okay.
So difficulty level is easiness level. So 13 is a 60. And there's
Wow.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 items that are 2 to 3 points harder.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then 14 is a 58, and that's the hardest one.
So the ones
among the hardest ones.
Yeah, and then what about 20?
And 20 is a 66.
So those are harder ones.
Well, no, there's you got so many more harder ones, correct?
Weird.
Like number 29, 30 are hard, 27's hard, 25 is hard.
No, wait. So wait, 29, 30 are hard?
Yeah. Relative.
So,
the difficulty level is 58.
So those I got right on both tests, 29 and 30. What was the other one you were mentioning?
25, 21.
25 I got right on both tests. 21 I got right on one of the tests. 17 I got right on both of the tests.
14, 11, 10.
So 14 9. I got wrong on both. 11 I got right on both. 10 I got right on both.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm reading from the wrong freaking column. So that's the 4th to 6th grade.
Oh, okay.
So for difficulty, it ranges from 90 down to 60. There's 60. So 10 is the hardest item. 60.
10 is the hardest item. Okay. Okay, that one I have right on both.
The other hard items are 21, 25, 29.
Yeah, those I have right on both. Yeah, that's fast.
Again, the easiest one's number 1, same as, and
yeah.
24 is easy, 25 is harder, 26 is easy, 7 is super easy. So
yeah, it's cool that he has difficulties for individual questions.
And then the discrimination values are interesting to look at in relationship to that.
Yeah.
Like, which ones are contributing a lot to the variation that you're measuring.
Yeah.
And, it's like some of them don't discriminate that well. Is that 15? Yeah, 15 doesn't discriminate as well.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the nature of more, well, not necessarily. 16 is kind of low too for its discrimination value. Even lower is 21. Doesn't discriminate a lot, but it's still above 25. So, and what that means, what discrimination does, the people that get it right, that score low on the test, detracts from the discrimination value. People that get it wrong, that get more on the test right, that detracts as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you subtract the top half of their population from the bottom half. Okay. On the full score, and see how those numbers line up with the individual items. The items, if more people on the top get it wrong than people on the bottom, the people on the bottom are guessing.
Yeah.
Answer right, because it's only 50%. That's why the difficulty levels can't get too low. Because you're gonna everything's above a 50.
Yeah.
On the sensitivity. So that just means the test has to be as strict as it can, and it works brilliantly.
Yeah, I guess he had a lot. He probably had to. I just can't imagine the amount of work it would have taken to arrive at something
Back
like
when he
that.
was in his 30s and 40s,
Yeah,
just going hog wild.
Because Ron was telling me about this to begin with, but with the just the whole conceptual problem with the sensitivity side, because with the tonal and rhythm side, when you're asking if something's the same or different, there is in the sense it's a different type of correct answer. It's more objective.
Mm-hmm.
But this was done like in terms of developing the answers. From what I understand, he had lots of great musicians listen to these, and it got whittled down to the point where there were a set of questions that certain musicians agreed on the answers being right or wrong.
Oh yeah, I believe it was 10 people, and 9 out of 10 had to agree that the answer was this. That's what I heard. Now, that's what I remember from class, but my memory has been faulty.
So these 9 or 10 these 9 or 10 people got assaulted with different questions until these 30 emerged as the ones that were probably just agreed on across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then, so you had to have the right answers, but then they also then had to discriminate well.
Yeah.
And in order to discriminate well, you also have to have so if it's too easy, it's not discriminating at all. If it's too hard, not enough people are getting it right, it's not going to discriminate as well. So you got to find those things that are in the perfect, zone, and then spread out others around them so you can get your high and low hits, right? Otherwise, you're going to have no standard deviation.
Yeah. I just want to know how you train this in somebody, whether or not the aptitude is stabilized.
Yeah, well, that's the book that I read that little section from. There's, maybe I'll
what did he say
I'll
again?
scan that and send you that section. Like, what do you do for kids that are high or low in these tests?
Yeah, that's what I want to know. Because what is it? I wrote down something. No, I didn't write down as much as I thought. Yeah, even if you just take a picture.
Did you take notes on your while you were taking the test? Like any ones that you struggled, or like your confidence level? You answered it, but your confidence level?
No, it was pretty much I didn't have any major question marks. The first time I did it with Ron, there were a few where I think there were 3 that I put question marks on, but I think it was just it was more so like an intentional thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because the 3 that I put question marks on with Ron, okay, so there were 3 that I put question marks on with Ron. The next test, I got those right, but the only one that I got wrong in both that also had a question mark was 14. That was the only one that caused me problems. Like where I very clearly, so
I've got, so when I think I told you, like I got the ones I was like not confident, I got right. But but then the next one I got wrong.
Yeah, Ron and I were talking about that actually.
So what's that mean?
Yeah, I think part of what could be happening is when you're getting fucked around with and you're not sure what it is, I think it's hard to let go of that experience and then focus on the next question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really do think so. And that's why I was wondering if like pausing.
But then you're right on it, right? It's cool.
It'd be interesting to take the test, at a delay and only write down answers that you are 100% just like gut intuitive reaction, any hint of it being wrong like gets, or another way that I see it is like, not just missing not just missing grades for getting something wrong, but actually having it detract from your score. you know
Yeah.
But no, it's cool. But yeah, it's made me think about, I want to do more. So I was doing some practice this morning where I'd play a phrase. I was recording. I'd play a phrase, record it, and then leave enough room in the recording for the phrase to be played again. And I do that a few times. And then, and I'd record a few melodies like that, playing each one like 3 times with rest. And then I was practicing with this. So I would listen to myself play it, and then I would play it. And then I would listen to myself play it on the recording, and then I would play it. And I really felt like doing that for like 10 minutes at the start of a practice session was really good. I found myself just spontaneously hearing like inner lines while I was playing more, but just little things like that. But yeah, it's fun, man. Like there's so many cool things that would be fun to research.
Yes, sir. It would.
Yeah.
Amazing. It'd be amazing to leave that legacy.
Yeah. So when I was watching this Peter Mixas guy, his YouTube channel, he obviously made this for like grad students. I'm pretty sure he made it for, or maybe undergrad students, but he was using a statistics program, and I'm not really familiar with these programs. Have you used any of them before?
I had a program that worked off of a CD-ROM.
Okay.
Back in the 90s. Now there's so many, like all the statistics I need, I do by spreadsheet, like the descriptive statistics. And then you can find them online, like to do simple t-tests and like that. Just plug in your data and it'll do it.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. I gotta learn about statistics.
SSPS was like the beast of all beasts.
So that's what this guy's using, SSPS.
Yeah, that's a beast.
Yeah. So I was watching him just do different things. There's like 5 or 10-minute videos, 15-minute videos, and I have a loose understanding of some of it just because I've read so much research. They mention these things, but I don't know about statistics, right? I haven't been properly educated in this. So that's where I don't know where to start.
Yeah, that's a higher order brain thing than I like to get into. Like, I don't retain it.
Yeah, fair enough. So
say that. But I like to understand the difference between various ANOVAs and how to get the most power out of, and all the statistical models that have been developed in the last 20, 30 years. Probably stuff. There's an ANACOVA, right? It's like and that was just new, an analysis of covariance versus an analysis of variance, and then like I remember I learned for the test to be able to answer what, here's a set of subjects, here's a set of subjects, blah, 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 blah. What's the appropriate, procedure for, what's the appropriate application, and you had to know what to use. And I couldn't tell you anymore.
Yeah.
What test do you use on to quantify what it is that's, that here's the purpose, here's the problem, here's the kids, these kids, it's the same kids. You're testing the before and after, so it's pre-test, post-test, and do you want to measure, the mean differences, and with 3 different levels of teaching, right? But it's the same kids, and so
well, I mean, basically, yeah, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, I want to know, like, if I have, like, so Eric, if I had 20 licks that I was struggling to learn, and I wanted to find the best practice techniques, right? And I split the licks into, I don't know, different sections. Like one I played 10 repetitions 3 times a day. Another group I played 10 repetitions once a day. Another group, things like that. I mean, what I want to know is like how many licks would I actually need if I was the only subject to figure out what technique is actually valid for me to use in the practice room?
Yeah.
Like, how would you actually design that?
I got to read up on it and get the batteries recharged, and then I could probably tell you.
Yeah, because I'm assuming there would have to be a pretty large amount of material if I was the only subject.
Not necessary. Just there just needs to be 60 items.
There has to be 60?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, that would be good. That would be great. 60 licks?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're not the case subject, the items are.
Yeah, exactly. And then, and in a sense, I don't even really care what works for other people to the same degree.
Yeah, no, but you can draw an inference from that case study that you just did, right? With statistical backing on, here's the really difficult ones, here's the really easy ones. Maybe you develop what Gordon did, and this might even be more valid because it's just for you, right?
Yeah.
Here are the items you want to give, to kids who are struggling. Give them the easy items, easy licks and the medium licks, instead of the medium and the hard licks, like whatever is harder for you.
Yeah. I mean, I basically want to just know the answer to like, is there really a difference when it's a lick that's super hard for me between doing 50 trials a day or 100 or 200? Like, is there an actual practical difference? Like, does playing it 4 times as much at that dosage actually give me any benefit towards learning? Because I feel like one thing you could do, and I was talking to a friend about this, like the only thing that I actually think matters for learning, instrumental licks is if the lick comes out during a performance. Like that has to be the actual testing criteria. Like if I play this Bach piece, does this fucking lick come out properly? And if it doesn't, then it doesn't matter if I can play it 8 times in a row, So I feel like that's a decent benchmark to test. Let's say there's like, I don't know, 6 Bach pieces and there's 10 licks in each that are challenging. And the pre-test would be me playing the piece with these mistakes. And then the post-test would be, you do all the practice interventions, and then I would perform again and analyze, like, was the expression and the accuracy better for these licks in question? Because that's basically what musicians have to do when they're learning pieces,
Yeah, I just have to think about it.
Yeah, no, that'd be cool. Because I'm sure you could get, a case study like that published, or at least that would be enough firepower to convince people that, hey, like it would be cool if we did a study with like Molly Gebrian or something on things like that,
Totally.
where we like.
She'd be the one. Yeah, I would just forget talking to me and talk to Molly about
it. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, she's cool. But it'd be so cool to do stuff like that and give aptitude tests before doing the studies too, because I just have never seen them.
Yeah.
Like try to control for that at the same time.
Yeah, that's now you get into the crux of the matter of good research. It's like you want to balance with kids. How do you balance them? Balance them with music aptitude.
Because could you imagine if there were these types of studies on instrumental practice techniques, but it's like some techniques are shown to work if your tonal aptitude is like average, but that technique is actually not useful for the group with the highest tonal aptitudes. Like I could see things like that emerging potentially. I don't know for sure, but it'd be interesting to know. Like it'd be interesting to see. It's like, well, if someone's rhythm and tonal aptitude are off the chart, like there really is no point for them to practice it 100 times a day. Like 20 is enough or something like that, you know? Which would make sense because I mean, that to me, that would spell out why people with like aptitudes that are just off the stratosphere seem to learn way more material. You know, they don't need as much repetition. They don't, but all right, dude, I'm gonna go make some food. That was fun.
All right.
Yeah, I want to start. I want to start, you know, experimenting with some things to try to get this even, you know, more dialed in. I'm gonna just start sending you. I'm gonna just start sending you melodies with different endings and be like, which one do you like better?
Yeah, no, we should. I've thought about, you know, my yes no game. I didn't never change it. It was right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that hard if you know what you're doing, I guess. But I was worried about it not discriminating well, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I never changed anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
I, you know, I didn't need to do the research. I borrowed heavily from what Gordon did for his, you know, yes no games for tones and, you know, rhythms. The Audi. Yeah, it's the
That's right.
same practice, but but like I just, you know, trying to teach somebody, you know, give the directions, and
Mm-hmm.
that's all you need to be able to take the test.
Yeah.
You know,
I really hope that my one friend does it, but he probably will because he did take the tonal and rhythm aptitude test when I sent it to him. But he's a monster like pop piano player. Like he sounds like a little Elton John or something. Like just has a really good improv ability and stuff. So I'm excited for him to take it. I wouldn't be surprised if his score is higher than mine on balance. Okay, dude. Well, I will see you next week. So this made me realize what I should be doing when I prepare these classical guitar exams. I should be sending recordings to Ron at different tempos and being like, choose the one that's best and just tell me to play it.
Yeah, but the jazz, you know, jazz start and ending, you know, and just do your basic, you know, just your basic 2-5 patterns, you
Mhm.
know, da 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 dee da da dee da da dee, you know, whatever. Re fa la do ti le or ti le so fa mi. Yeah, do that one. It's like, and then do something that's a little bit cooler or weirder, um, and jam it in between two other things that are stay the same. You know, which is the better lick?
Yeah.
Choose. That'd be fun as hell. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. I'd like to know. It's too bad we can't talk to Gordon about because did he compose all those melodies for the?
Oh yeah, I bet. Yeah, I don't know if he had graduate students that also composed some.
Okay. Yeah.
That might have been, you know, how he did it.
Yeah. No, that would be cool. Man, I still feel like the potential for data collection with the technology now is just absurd, you know?
Yeah, just you know what? You could fucking go on chat GPT and say, this is what I fucking want to do, and tell it, and ask it what statistical measures would you use.
Yeah.
And just do that.
I mean, that would be a good starting place.
Well, I'll get you the vocabulary. It'll give you exactly, hone your thinking, and they would spew out the vocabulary that you'd want to have for context of, like, independent samples. It's just me and a bunch of items. Give it all write down all the information that you already know, and just say, hey, what statistical measure should I use?
Yeah, I think we should start
for this problem, and hopefully it's smart enough to do that already.
Yeah, and if it's not, I feel like it like you said, it'll at least spit out the vocabulary that we should be looking into.
Yeah.
Right. But I feel like we should publish that.
And item numbers, and should I use more items, or how long should the test be? Shouldn't probably be longer than 30 minutes. 20 would be better. 45 is like with the break. People take. You're supposed to take the 2 tonal on one week, the 2 rhythm on another week. So, and then the sensitivities all at once. So the sensitivities are just.
You're supposed to take 3. Holy shit!
So you take 2 and all 3 all at once.
Yeah.
So there's 3 administrations.
I did 2 of the sensitivity. I did style and phrasing right next to each other. But no, I think we should start to publish stuff. Start to run small studies, because it would give us a cool project to collaborate on. It would also just give me an in, because like I'm pretty committed to not getting a bachelor's degree. So the only hope I have for getting into a master's program is if I'm already published. Like there's no other way.
How many years have you studied with a PhD? That should count for something, right? It's like
well, I mean, you would be a good, recommendation.
Tutor. I mean, but no, I'll give you a certificate of completion.
That'd be hilarious. I'm gonna have the only like licensed approval to teach harmonic learning sequence after your demise. But no, it'd be cool. We should start thinking of small things we could study, at least to just have our name in the zeitgeist. It'd be cool.
Yeah.
I think it'd be fun.
It's just so funny, because it's like, this is what I do for fun, but I haven't needed to. I haven't had a reason to. But now I was going to go for that job. It's like, well, why can I do these anyway? And I had a whole study written up for doing EEG.
Okay.
On college kids, and I was going to give them map and see what's going on. Exactly what I told Ron. Right between the second.
That's what we should do. We should just get Ron in, and like it should just be me, you, and Ron. Like, someone leads an idea and the other 2 are just in on it. And if I did studies on instrumental stuff, I'd still love you and Ron to be in on it. Like we should all just get in on it and have our names on a bunch of shit and just get the thing going.
Yeah.
Because Ron would be so fantastic to have for this, And maybe we could figure out what the fuck is going on with the harmonic aptitude stuff. Like why, like what's actually needed to raise the score at what age and stuff like that. Like,
can I make, so that would be the first thing I'd want to do. I would make harmonic improvisation readiness record, find something that works that doesn't act like that measure, because that measure's a mess.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got a lot of questions about it.
Yeah.
Content validity right off the bat. It's like they're all the same. People think sameness is different.
I could see stuff being like,
and correlate that with kids who scored well on mine to that when they're old enough. So I need to give this would be my highest priority right now, is get a mass collection of data just on on, I need all the kids in the world that will take it, but you have to trust the parents that they'll enter the data correct.
Yeah.
You can't.
Well, I think it'd be cool to experiment with like what we've been talking about, where you use sets of patterns instead of individual functions, because they seem easier to audiate.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that would give us more resolution in terms of what's actually difficult, But okay, dude, I'm gonna make some food and consult with ChatGPT. So that's my.
Yeah, and I'm going to send you the link to send to everybody you know.
For the harmonic stuff? Or for the balance?
For my yes/no game.
Yeah, but is there a certain age cutoff? Like you don't want to
2 to 7. 3's better, but you could. But no, I could collect data on anybody. Just
do they like, is there somewhere they put their age in, or do they just tell you when you get the?
How old is your child? I only give them 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 6, 7. So I suppose I could. I just do 7+, or do I?
Wait, what?
I could add.
How much is the map like test package / book?
$140 at GIAmusic.com.
The scanner didn't work consistently, so but you'll see it.
Okay, sir.
All right, man. Thanks.
Yeah, lots of fun.